It feels like a victory. That felt like a victory to me. I feel like I won that round.
Every episode,
I won.
I feel like I'm the voice of reason here.
Oh, gosh. He's now left the stage.
The studio.
Oh, and he slammed the door. All right, Mr. Norbs. We are continuing episode 2, Cold War Origins. Picking up on the first Berlin Crisis.
Yeah, boy.
The Berlin Blockade / Airlift.
Left the discussion on the Marshall Plan.
We did.
But yeah, okay, back to Germany.
We did. Yeah. So, yeah, containment, etc. So, this brings us now to what we started the previous episode on in terms of understanding the placement of Berlin in the Soviet zone, the communist zone, and West Berlin being that oasis of capitalist democracy. And the idea that you could work or live in the East, work in the West fairly easily, 2 minutes on a subway, boom, bada bing, you are, sitting in Western luxury. Certainly a better life than the oppressive Stasi-esque East Germany, East Berlin. And so that obviously was an irritant to Joseph, Joe, Uncle Joe, Djugashvili, Stalini. He took, he obviously wanted to expel capitalism from the Eastern zone. He felt that it wasn't right that they were there. A lot of kids often ask, why was Berlin also split?
Capital city.
It's the capital city, yeah. It's an important economic center. And so what does he do? He, cuts off all access because obviously the West was transporting goods to the west of Berlin. And he says no more rail transport, no more road transport, no more canal transport. And that becomes a crisis because the West won't back down. Remember, what does he want to do? He wants to stifle capitalism. He wants to squeeze it, strangle it out.
But also make it less desirable to East Berliners,
Yeah. That's probably a good point. And so, this now becomes a crisis, a focus point. Things could turn ugly. Does the West back off? Of course not. It's essentially, let's argue this is round one. Because it's a potential fight.
So what is this? 48?
48, yeah. June 48. And so how does the West respond? This becomes a critical point. What do?
Airlift.
You missed your cue there. The airlift, the Berlin airlift.
Yeah.
They decide, right, we're going to grab a bunch of old bombers and whatnot. Don't ask me to say which ones. I think it's the B-27 and the CR.
That's actually that's an interesting choice of planes as well.
Yeah,
using bombers to fly in supplies.
But it's what they have, and it's what's big enough to carry cargo stuff. Remember that it's early years of commercial flight, so there aren't really too many other commercial planes. There's a private owner, a bit rusty on the story, but there's a private English owner. I think he has 9, again, C something or others. My brother and my best mate will, if they watch this,
C-17s would be the current ones in operation, I think. Boeing C-17s. Well, we need a fact checker here.
Yeah, as I said, my brother and my best mate, who are both airline pilots, will be very unhappy with me. But anyway, World War II era bombers. And yeah, they fly in goods, and they fly in more and more goods. I think that's the main point, that Stalin in his book.
I was right. It's a C-17.
Is it the C-17?
Well, probably not back then. I think C-17s are more recent.
Okay.
They're still in operation.
You can put in a caption somewhere what it was. Make me look stupid. What were we saying? Yeah. So the purpose of Stalin is to squeeze them out, and the purpose of the West in this round, in this kind of boxing match, is to not allow that to happen. You know, it's a very deliberate. They could have easily just packed up and gone and well, sorry, West Berlin, tough. Obviously, the West, you know, is panicking, and it's not a nice place. They're used to the good things in life, and they're the ones who got lucky. They happen to live in the West. But you know, the West has to now continue to support them, and so they continue to fly, and they continue to fly more and more every month. It actually increases, and obviously Stalin just can't maintain the blockade, so the airlift is ultimately victorious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what's that? That's about 11 months. I think it started in June 48, ended in May 49. And so West USA winners of round 1. Technically round 1 because it's potentially war. Stalin never attacks. If he had, World War III.
Yeah, we generally accept that as the possible outcome. Yeah, man. I still find those planes, like the choice of planes used, a very interesting. I mean, these are bombers. You know,
I think it's a matter of no choice because again, it's early commercial airline period.
But also, one of the things that I tend to highlight in class is this idea of a perceived threat. You know, how does the West view the Soviets? There would have been a lot of spying, a lot of potentially espionage as well, but for the most part it's just tension and suspense. You know, they might desire to invade, they might desire to dominate, they might desire this. And so when you see planes, you know, bombers flying over to drop off supplies, and you're a Soviet soldier, how do you internalize that?
Yeah. I mean, yes. Yeah, I mean, were they briefed? Were they debriefed on the issue? Like, this might happen. I don't know if they actually knew, if the East knew that it was coming. I've never actually looked into that. Did the West make an announcement to Stalin or whoever?
Even if they did, these are your enemies. Are you?
Yeah. I mean, anyway, it's an interesting question. Point is, it didn't lead to a war, and the West won that bout. I think, I wouldn't say more importantly, but just as importantly is the outcomes of that. The fact that leads to a few big steps in this story. The two sides, the East and the West, are actually now formed into different countries. East Germany, West Germany. Officially, East Germany is always an ironic one. The German Democratic Republic. That's the East. That's the oppressive, communist. The Stasi-run East, and then the West is the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany. And so, the creation of two actual countries for the first time, which obviously lasts until the collapse of the wall in 1989. And also the creation of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which still exists.
Let's
Well, I find that a very interesting topic because, I mean, why does it still exist? And you can look at current day affairs and Ukraine and Putin and there's a whole other side of that argument. The encroaching NATO, pushing further and further towards the borders of Russia. Anywho, another discussion for another day.
Let's not delve into that one.
Well, not right now. So NATO's formed, and only a few years later, in the 50s, early 50s, I want to say 53.
Around about that. I was going to say 4.
One
around
or
about
two.
there.
Warsaw Pact. So that's the communist thing.
Yes.
So what is it? What is NATO? And so if you're talking about increased tension, which is often that final 8-mark question, increases in tension as per propaganda, Iron Curtain speech, Truman Doctrine, First Berlin Crisis, the airlift, all of that increases tension. Now you have the creation of two military alliances, because NATO essentially is a military alliance.
Yeah, yeah.
And obviously all the countries bordering on the North Atlantic, Canada, USA, Greenland, Iceland, most of the Scandinavian countries, not Finland, I don't think, no.
Finland would have joined more recently, actually.
Have they?
Yeah.
I know they were trying to.
More recently. Ukraine would have been trying.
Well, Ukraine cannot. It's part of the agreement because it's on the border. So I don't think Finland has. I stand to be corrected. But I think Finland has also been kind of naysayed because it's on the borders. Anyway.
Yeah, they certainly have been prepping for a potential Russian invasion in the future. It's perceived, obviously, not to say Russia had any intentions. Yeah. But I'm pretty sure Finland would have joined. But we stand to be corrected.
Production manager will check that too. So then obviously that's, a military alliance increases tension by its very nature. I mean, look back to World War I. One of the major factors that started World War I was military alliances.
Because also you are essentially arming yourself over an ideological battle. All along it's been about we can't allow communism to spread, and now you're actually arming. You are saying we could possibly use force if needs be, or if the other side oversteps.
That's exactly what it is. And then the Warsaw Pact as a response to that, which includes all those Eastern European countries with Russia, is it's the same thing. It's basically saying, right, we're now you've prepared for war, we're preparing for war. It's a response. It's a direct response. It will definitely increase tensions. NATO Warsaw Pact a huge point. And as I said, NATO continues. Warsaw Pact dissolved at the end of the Soviet Union, 1991. Boris Yeltsin was the last communist leader. He's the one who ended it. And the Warsaw Pact dissolved with it. So
NATO continues.
And so obviously tensions increase over that. And then in the 50s, I think the main part of the 50s is looking at that exodus. It's looking at how East Germans in general, but obviously East Berliners are migrating en masse, hundreds, then thousands, tens of thousands, per year, per month. Prior to, was it July and August 1961, prior to the erection of the wall itself, the late night, 12th of August 1961. I'm trying to think now. In by that stage of August, I think it was about 20-something thousand had migrated in that month alone as tensions increased. But between about 48, 49 and 61, numbers vary, but anywhere between 2.5 and 3 million East Germans had migrated across, hence an exodus. And obviously that becomes a brain drain. Meaning that and I think students need to understand that it's an economic disaster for East Germany. When you have that many people of a pretty small country. I'm not sure what the entire population was, probably sub 10 million. Leaving with all their skills, all their
investments.
Exactly. It becomes a problem, and so by that later stage, by 61. Khrushchev's in charge of Russia. Is it at the command of Khrushchev? I mean, there's evidence of letters from him to East Germany. I'm trying to think of the name of the East German president, leader. Was it Walter Ulbricht? I think it was Walter Ulbricht.
All put it right.
Yeah, we've got a lot of captions today because I've blanked. Apologies. Anyway, so that order would have been East German government, but how much influence of Khrushchev, of Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet leader at that time, was in that decision. So that obviously then looks at the need of the East of the Russians, of the Soviets, of East Germany to prevent that drain. I think over and above that, it's also an embarrassment. You know, it's testimony to the failure of communism, because you said it earlier in the previous episode. They're trying to escape.
Yeah,
they're choosing a better life over that oppressive, impoverished life that they had in the East. Yeah. So, if we look at the creation of the Berlin Wall, I think it's important to describe exactly what it was.
Yeah, I mean, it's a physical boundary that for the first time in history would have shown or illustrated the contrast between communism and capitalism, the failures and successes, but also the desire and even the views of the public towards both these ideologies. You know, So I sometimes relate it, even though the Iron Curtain speech would have been much earlier. You know, this is a manifestation of that Iron Curtain. You know, it's a symbol.
It's part of it.
Yeah,
it's an isolated, very prominent part of it, because it's separating East and West.
But also now the oppressive nature of Russia, the Soviets in the East, is now made manifest, because it wasn't just a wall. You know, the machine gun posts, barbed wire, armed patrols. You know, the East Berliners essentially were imprisoned here. You know, don't you dare try to leave. You know, and it goes back to the irony you pointed out earlier. You know, this posture of a democracy in the East as well. But you can't have that liberty to even cross over. And mind you, Berlin is still a city. You know, you might have had family on the other side, a company on the other side, and you just so happen to live in the eastern side. And so it's the physical separation of people's livelihoods in the process. Yeah,
it becomes a very sort of tragic tale of separation of families and that. There's lots of photographs of families. So I think it's important to point out the early advent of this is just a barbed wire fence. Late August 12th, wake up literally as a West Berliner more importantly, because remember the fence and then the wall is put around West Berlin. You know, and obviously that's confusing to kids. Well, surely you're trapping the East Berliners. No, because remember, West Berlin is in Berlin, which is in the Soviet zone.
Yes.
Or at this stage, East Germany. And so what the East German government is trying to do is prevent East Germans and East Berliners from getting into West Berlin, which is an easy route out of West Berlin into West Germany. So escaping, so-called, to the West. So yes, it's a fence around, so through the center and around the west of Berlin. And then obviously over time, over a few months, it's built into a wall. There's wonderful footage. I say wonderful cautiously, where one of the block of flats is actually the border between East and West. And so for a few months, the East Berliners are climbing and jumping through the windows, being caught by, I don't know, fire department, local community with blankets and mattresses and such, catching them as they jump out of the second, third floor. Obviously that didn't last long, it was bricked up, but it is, just a fascinating little snippet. And then obviously it developed it developed into a very large wall, as you said, with security, with security towers, with armed security machine guns, with the anti-tank big concrete blocks, I forget what they're actually called, and an entire sort of moat, like a waterless moat, a ditch around it, and probably about up to 50 meters of secure land, like call it no man's land, I suppose, between the wall and the other sides.
Yeah.
Of course, interestingly, that's on the east, because they're the ones who built it. And the west, you can walk right up to the wall and kind of look through and wave to people and whatever. I don't think anyone got shot via that method. But it became impossible. Obviously, there was always a checkpoint Charlie, and various other checkpoints where you could prior to the wall move, and that's why it was easy to go from west to West Berlin to West Germany. And that's what they were trying to stop. So now you can't get into the west, but if you're in West Berlin, you can still get out through those checkpoints. So the west weren't trapped, but they didn't know that. You know, so when they woke up panicking, terrified, angry, protesting, and they had no idea, and the West didn't have an idea. You know, the Western governments didn't know what was going on either. So they were trying to let's feel this out, what's actually happening. You know, and this is why it becomes a crisis, because it becomes a literal standoff. You know, where you actually see the Russian tanks come up to the checkpoint, and then the American tanks. And I always point that out in that video. There's a young American, all these tank drivers are young Americans and Russian, whichever side you're on, but they're young. They're probably 19, 20, 21, whatever. You know, they're young, they're stupid, they're like we all are at that age. There's a reason why 20-something-year-old male drivers have to pay a massive insurance premium. You know, and this guy races up, right up to the checkpoint, and then slams on brakes. You know, like you can see the tank, rock. And I'm just thinking, when I point this out to the kids, this is what separated us from World War III. This testosterone-filled 20-year-old whatever tank driver, and many of them, you know, 200-yard maybe face-off, turret to turret. You know, this is how critical this point came. You know, hence the second Berlin crisis, all over ideology and misunderstanding and miscommunication. You know, again, the East called it the anti-fascist bulwark. That's their propaganda. The West called it what it was. And if you look at testimony from many East Germans and East Berliners, they will tell you that it was there to trap the East from leaving, stop them from leaving. Yeah. Yeah, so it's a critical point in that history. It's the point to which they need to know. They don't need to know beyond that for origins of Cold War.
Because then we look at other case studies from that point. I think we delve into Vietnam from that point.
Yeah, we'll have a look at that next. All right, I think production manager is telling us some cameras have gone. Which one?
Was it my cameras?
That one and that one. That one's good. Oh, we're all right then. I think that wraps it.
Cool.
I think that takes us to the end of the origins. I would just stress that the question could also be who is to blame. For the Cold War, and the answer to that is both sides, because both sides instigate propaganda. So as long as they understand that you can argue that as a balanced argument, we should. But if it's tension, it's always increased tension through propaganda. Don't ignore the cartoons, because they're part of that propaganda, and they stimulate the perception of that society, whoever's on the receiving end of that propaganda. They start to perceive, as you said earlier, one side being a villain and the other side being good. All right.
Alrighty. Sweet.
Let's wrap it there. Much to the delight of
the kiddos
production
crew.
Okie dokes. Call it there.
All right.